Hi, I'm Maya. At my cousin's engagement party last summer, my entire family gathered around the patio table and burst into laughter when I mentioned my YouTube channel. Still playing with that little camera hobby? My father asked, shaking his head like I'd just told him I was planning to become a professional finger painter. They didn't know that 3 floors above them, in my laptop bag, sat a contract for a $1.2 million sponsorship deal with Nordstrom Gaming. They didn't know my hobby had already generated more revenue in 6 months than my brother's law practice made in 2 years. But the moment my phone rang during dessert and I answered with Maya Chen, creative director speaking, watching their faces drain of color as the caller's voice carried across the silent table, everything changed. Forever. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me take you back to where this journey really began. Growing up in the Chen household meant living under a microscope of expectations that had been polished and perfected through 3 generations of academic achievers. My grandmother had been a mathematics professor in Shanghai before immigrating to Vancouver. My mother earned her doctorate in biochemistry before I turned 10. My father built his accounting firm from nothing into one of the most respected practices in British Columbia. My older brother Marcus followed the script perfectly, graduating summa cum laude from law school and landing a position at a prestigious downtown firm before his 25th birthday. Then there was me. I studied computer science because it seemed practical enough to satisfy my parents while giving me the technical skills I secretly knew I'd need for something bigger. But while my classmates were dreaming of Silicon Valley startups or corporate programming jobs, I was spending my nights learning video editing software, studying color theory, and watching every tutorial I could find about camera work and storytelling. My dorm room looked like a small production studio, with ring lights carefully positioned and sound panels I'd crafted from egg cartons and towels. My family saw none of this preparation. To them, I was simply the daughter who took too long to decide on a career path, the one who spent suspicious amounts of time alone in her room, emerging only for family dinners where I'd sit quietly while Marcus discussed his latest case victories, or my parents debated the merits of various investment strategies. The first video I ever posted was a simple makeup tutorial filmed in my tiny apartment bathroom. The lighting was terrible. My hands shook throughout the entire recording, and I stumbled over my words so many times that the final edit was barely 3 minutes long after cutting out all my mistakes. I published it on a Tuesday night in October, then immediately closed my laptop and tried to forget I'd ever pressed the upload button. When I woke up the next morning, it had 17 views. By the end of the week, it had reached 300. Comments started trickling in from strangers telling me my techniques were helpful, asking for more content, requesting specific tutorials for upcoming events or special occasions. Something inside my chest fluttered with a sensation I'd never experienced before, a combination of pride and possibility that made my fingers itch to pick up the camera again. But I told no one. During family dinners, when conversation inevitably turned to our respective career progress, I found myself perfecting the art of vague deflection. "Still working on some projects," became my standard response when asked about my post-graduation plans. Exploring different opportunities when pressed for specifics. My family interpreted this as indecision, as the natural confusion of a young woman who hadn't yet found her calling. They spoke about me in gentle, patient tones, the way you might discuss a late bloomer who would eventually find her way. Marcus would sometimes pat my shoulder after particularly awkward dinners and offer career advice, suggesting I consider applying to law school or perhaps pursuing an MBA. "You're smart enough," he'd say with genuine kindness that somehow stung worse than outright criticism. "You just need to find your direction." What they didn't see were the nights I spent hunched over my computer, learning advanced editing techniques, and studying analytics data with the intensity of a scientist examining crucial research. They didn't know about the spreadsheets I maintained, tracking engagement rates and demographic breakdowns with mathematical precision that would have impressed even my grandmother. They had no idea that I was developing content calendars, negotiating with small brands for product partnerships, and slowly building an audience that hung on every video I produced. By my second year of consistent posting, my channel had grown to 50,000 subscribers. The comments section had transformed into a community where strangers shared personal stories, supported each other through difficult times, and celebrated small victories together. Brands began reaching out, offering compensation for honest reviews and product placements. The first check I received for $200 felt like winning the lottery, even though I deposited it quietly and mentioned it to no one. My family remained completely unaware of this parallel universe I was constructing. To them, I was still Maya the undecided, Maya the quiet one, Maya who spent too much time on her computer and not enough time networking at professional events or pursuing traditional markers of success. When distant relatives asked about my career during holiday gatherings, my parents would smile diplomatically and change the subject, their embarrassment subtle but unmistakable. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was building exactly the kind of business my father would respect if he understood its scope. Revenue projections, brand partnerships, audience development strategies, content production schedules that rivaled any corporate marketing department. But because it involved a camera and happened on the internet, it was automatically categorized as frivolous, temporary, something I would eventually outgrow once I decided to pursue a real career. I started carrying business cards in my wallet, though I never had occasion to use them around family. Maya Chen, content creator. They read in clean, minimalist font with my subscriber count printed small along the bottom. The numbers grew larger with each new batch I ordered, a private scoreboard of success that no one in my immediate circle could see or celebrate. The breakthrough came during a particularly stressful period when I was juggling 3 major brand campaigns while simultaneously dealing with my mother's increasing pressure to consider graduate school applications. I had been working 18-hour days, editing videos until my eyes burned, and responding to business emails before sunrise. My bedroom had evolved into a professional workspace, with lighting equipment, camera gear, and product samples organized with military precision. One evening, as I finished uploading a sponsored video that would earn me more money than Marcus, made in a month, my mother knocked on my door to deliver another stack of graduate program brochures. She glanced around my room, taking in the setup I could no longer completely disguise, and sighed with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than anger. "Maya," she said, settling the brochures on my desk beside my camera equipment. "You're 24 years old. This photography thing is fine as a hobby, but you need to think seriously about your future. Your father and I didn't sacrifice everything for your education so you could play around with social media forever." I wanted to tell her that I was thinking about my future every single day, that I was building something substantial and meaningful, that my hobby was generating income, streams, and business relationships that most traditional careers never achieve. Instead, I nodded and promised to look through the brochures, then waited for her to leave before quietly moving them to a drawer where they would remain unopened. That night marked a turning point in my relationship with secrecy. I realized I wasn't just hiding my success from my family anymore. I was protecting it. Their lack of understanding had created a safe space where my business could grow without the pressure of their expectations or the risk of their skepticism, undermining my confidence. The silence that had once felt like shame began to feel like strategy. When the Nord Stream Gaming email arrived in my inbox 3 months later, I read it 17 times before allowing myself to believe it was real. They wanted to discuss a long-term partnership that would make me the primary face of their new campaign targeting female gamers. The compensation package they outlined was more money than I had ever imagined earning. Enough to buy a house, enough to fund the production company I had started dreaming about, enough to prove once and for all that I had built something extraordinary from nothing but determination and a camera. But first, I would have to survive my cousin's engagement party. The Fairmont Hotel's rooftop terrace sparkled under string lights that cast everything in golden warmth, but I felt cold despite the July heat. Vancouver's skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass barriers, a glittering reminder that somewhere out there, hundreds of thousands of people knew my name, watched my content, and valued my opinions. Here, surrounded by my extended family, I might as well have been invisible. My cousin Jessica's engagement party was the kind of event my family excelled at organizing and attending. Elegant without being ostentatious, successful without being flashy, everything perfectly calibrated to demonstrate prosperity and good taste. Round tables draped in cream linen held centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. The guest list read like a directory of Vancouver's professional elite: lawyers, doctors, business owners, and their accomplished children who had followed. Predictable paths to respectable careers. I adjusted my black blazer and checked my phone discreetly. 3 brand emails awaited responses, 2 collaboration requests needed review, and my latest video had gained another 5,000 views since I'd checked an hour ago. But here, none of that mattered. Here, I was simply Maya who still hadn't figured out what she wanted to do with her life. "There's our little artist," Aunt Linda announced as I approached the family table, her voice carrying that particular tone adults use when they're trying to be encouraging, but can't quite hide their pity. She gestured toward an empty chair between my mother and teenage cousin David, who was scrolling through TikTok with the glazed expression of someone consuming content without creating any of his own. Uncle Robert raised his wine glass in my direction. "Still making those little videos, Maya? That's wonderful that you have a creative outlet." His smile was genuine but patronizing, the same expression he might use to praise a child's finger painting. The word little hung in the air like smoke, diminishing everything I'd built into something quaint and temporary. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Family gatherings always amplified his anxiety about my unconventional choices, especially when surrounded by relatives whose children had achieved traditional markers of success. "Maya's exploring various opportunities," he said carefully, using the same diplomatic language he employed with difficult clients. "She's very talented with technology." Technology, as if I spent my days playing video games instead of running a business that generated 6-figure annual revenue. "That's nice, dear," my grandmother chimed in, reaching over to pat my hand. "But when are you going to find a nice stable job? Maybe something in an office where you can use your computer skills properly?" Her English still carried traces of her Shanghai accent, lending gravity to words that felt like gentle imprisonment. Marcus arrived at the table carrying 2 plates from the appetizer station, looking effortlessly confident in his tailored navy suit. At 28, he possessed the kind of assured bearing that came from knowing exactly where he belonged in the world. He handed 1 plate to his girlfriend Sarah, a pediatrician who somehow managed to look both professional and radiant, even at weekend social events. "Sorry I'm late," Marcus said, kissing my mother on the cheek before settling into his seat. "Long meeting with the Patterson case. Sometimes I think corporate litigation never sleeps." He spoke about his work with the casual confidence of someone who never questioned whether his career choices were worthy of respect. Sarah leaned forward with the kind of warm interest that made her excellent with both children and nervous family members. "Maya, your mom mentioned you've been working on some creative projects. That's so exciting. I wish I had artistic talents like that." Her kindness was genuine, but the assumption that creativity and financial success were mutually exclusive felt like a small punch to the stomach. "It's more business than art, actually," I said quietly, immediately regretting the words. Defending my work only made me sound more desperate to be taken seriously. Uncle Robert chuckled, the sound warm but dismissive. "Business, eh? Well, everyone's an entrepreneur these days with the internet. Good for you for trying things out while you're young." He turned to Marcus. "How's the partnership track looking?" I heard Whitman and Associates might be expanding their corporate division. The conversation flowed away from me like water around a stone, focusing on Marcus's latest professional victories and Sarah's recent promotion to head pediatrician at her clinic. I sat quietly, picking at salmon that tasted like expensive disappointment, listening to my family discuss stock portfolios, real estate investments, and vacation home purchases. My phone buzzed against my leg. Without looking, I knew it was probably another comment notification, another subscriber milestone alert, or perhaps another brand inquiry. The parallel universe where I was successful, respected, and financially independent existed just inches away in my pocket, but I couldn't access it without appearing rude or confirming their suspicions that I was addicted to social media. Maya always has her nose in that phone, my mother said with apologetic fondness. She's part of that generation that lives online. We keep telling her to engage more with the real world. The real world. As if the community I'd built, the businesses I'd helped grow, the young women I'd taught to feel confident in their own skin somehow didn't qualify as real because they existed beyond physical spaces. Cousin David, still absorbed in his own device, snorted softly. Yeah, everyone thinks they're going to be famous on YouTube now. My friend Tyler has like 50 subscribers and thinks he's the next Mr. Beast. It's kind of sad, honestly. He didn't look up from his screen, unaware that his casual dismissal cut deeper than any direct criticism. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He prided himself on raising children who were grounded and realistic, who understood the difference between dreams and achievable goals. My apparent delusions of internet fame reflected poorly on his parenting, suggesting he'd failed to instill proper values about hard work and traditional success. There's nothing wrong with having hobbies, Aunt Linda said diplomatically. But Maya's too smart to waste her education on pipe dreams. She could do anything she sets her mind to. The implication was clear. If I was truly applying myself, I would choose something more substantial than content creation. Jessica's fiancé. Kevin approached our table, champagne flute in hand, and the broad smile of someone celebrating a major life milestone. As a successful architect whose firm had designed several prominent Vancouver buildings, he represented exactly the kind of achievement my family understood and respected. His work was visible, physical, undeniably real. Mr. Chen, Kevin said, shaking my father's hand warmly. Thank you again for helping with the contract review for our new condo. Your attention to detail saved us thousands in potential issues. This was how professional success looked in my family's world: concrete services, measurable value, mutual respect between established practitioners. Maya's our creative one, my mother said when Kevin's attention turned my way, her voice carrying that particular mixture of pride and concern parents reserve for discussing their most puzzling child. She's very artistic, always has been. We're hoping she'll find a way to channel that into something practical. Kevin nodded politely. That's great. Creative skills are so valuable in architecture. Have you considered graphic design or marketing? There are lots of stable careers that use artistic abilities. His suggestion was well-intentioned, but felt like being offered a coloring book when you've already painted masterpieces. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing space to breathe, away from the weight of their gentle disappointment. In the marble-appointed powder room, I finally checked my phone properly. The numbers that greeted me would have shocked my family into silence. My latest video had crossed 500,000 views. I'd gained 3,000 new subscribers since. Arriving at the party, and the comment section overflowed with praise for the makeup transformation I'd demonstrated. More importantly, there was an email from Nordstream Gaming's marketing director confirming our call for next week to finalize contract details. The subject line alone, partnership confirmation, 1.2 Mammer campaign, contained more validation than I'd received from my family in years. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, seeing someone my family couldn't quite recognize. They saw Maya the uncertain, Maya the impractical dreamer, Maya who needed guidance to find her way. The woman looking back at me had built an empire from curiosity and determination, had earned the respect of industry professionals, and was about to sign a contract that would change everything. But for now, I smoothed my blazer, tucked my phone away, and prepared to return to a table where my greatest achievement was still dismissed as a hobby. The pattern had started years before the engagement party, weaving itself so seamlessly into our family dynamics that I barely noticed when dismissal became the default response to anything I touched. It began during my sophomore year of university, when I casually mentioned, during a Sunday dinner, that I'd started filming makeup tutorials for my residence hall friends. "That sounds fun, sweetie," my mother had said while clearing dishes, the kind of automatic response adults give to children describing imaginary games. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your studies." The conversation moved immediately to Marcus's internship at a corporate law firm, where he was learning about mergers and acquisitions from partners who billed $400 an hour. That dismissal established the template. My creative pursuits were categorized as fun, temporary diversions that might teach me valuable lessons about responsibility and time management before I inevitably moved on to serious adult concerns. When I mentioned learning video editing, software, my father suggested it might be useful for creating presentation materials in whatever corporate job I eventually obtained. When I talked about color theory and lighting techniques, my grandmother nodded approvingly and said it would help me decorate my future home beautifully. Every conversation became an exercise in translation, where my family heard hobby and I meant business, where they heard temporary and I meant foundational. The disconnect wasn't malicious. It was something far more frustrating than deliberate sabotage. It was loving, well-intentioned blindness that refused to recognize the shape of success when it didn't fit familiar patterns. Christmas dinner during my junior year provided a perfect example of how thoroughly my family had internalized their narrative about my direction in life. We were gathered around my parents' dining room table, which my mother had set with her finest china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Extended family filled every seat: aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had watched me grow up and felt entitled to opinions about my future. Uncle James, my father's older brother, had just finished describing his son Michael's promotion to senior analyst at an investment firm. Michael was 26, drove a German sedan, and owned a downtown condo with granite countertops and a view of False Creek. He represented everything my family understood about building a successful life: steady progression through recognizable institutions, accumulation of traditional assets, social status that could be easily explained to strangers. "And what about our Maya?" Uncle James had asked, turning his attention my way with the benevolent smile of someone genuinely interested in a young person's development. "Still playing around with those makeup videos?" Playing around. The phrase landed like a small slap, reducing months of careful planning, hours of research, and growing engagement metrics to childish experimentation. I had wanted to explain that my channel had just reached 25,000 subscribers, that beauty brands were beginning to send me products for review, that I had developed a content calendar more sophisticated than most small business marketing strategies. Instead, I had smiled and said, "Something like that." My father had jumped in quickly, probably sensing my discomfort but misunderstanding its source. "Maya's very creative," he said, using the tone parents employ when they're proud of their child's finger painting but know it won't hang in art galleries. "We're encouraging her to think about how she might use those skills in a professional setting, maybe marketing or advertising." The suggestion wasn't entirely wrong, but it missed the point so completely that I felt momentarily dizzy. I wasn't aspiring to use my skills in someone else's marketing department. I was already running my own marketing operation, building brand partnerships, and developing strategies that generated measurable results. But explaining this would have required them to fundamentally revise their understanding of what I was doing. And the holiday dinner table wasn't the place for paradigm shifts. Aunt Susan, my mother's sister who worked as a human resources director, had leaned forward with the helpful expression of someone offering career guidance. You know, Maya, a lot of companies are looking for young people who understand social media. You could probably get an entry-level position in digital marketing somewhere and work your way up. Your generation has such an advantage with technology. Entry-level. Work your way up. The phrases implied I was starting from zero, that my existing work was amateur preparation for eventual real employment, rather than a thriving business that was already generating income and industry recognition. I had wanted to show them the analytics dashboard on my phone, the spreadsheet where I tracked revenue streams, the email folder full of collaboration requests from brands they would recognize. Instead, I had nodded and thanked her for the advice, then excused myself to help my mother serve dessert. In the kitchen, away from the well-meaning career counseling, I had checked my phone to find notifications that my latest video had surpassed 50,000 views and earned comments from viewers in 12 different countries. The pattern repeated, itself at every family gathering, each instance adding another layer to their conviction that I was a bright young woman who simply needed guidance to find her proper path. During my cousin Rebecca's wedding shower, I listened to my aunts discuss my artistic phase as if creativity were something I would eventually outgrow, like teenage rebellion or an unfortunate haircut. At my grandfather's 75th birthday party, distant relatives asked when I planned to get a real job, apparently unaware that real jobs increasingly existed in digital spaces they couldn't see or understand. The most painful dismissal came during my graduation ceremony, when I finally earned my computer science degree after 4 years of balancing academic requirements with my growing online presence. My family filled an entire row in the auditorium, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. The celebration dinner afterward should have been a triumph, recognition of my academic achievement, and the beginning of adult independence. But when conversation turned to my post-graduation plans, the familiar pattern reasserted itself with devastating clarity. Marcus, who had graduated law school the previous year, offered to introduce me to friends working at technology companies in Vancouver. Sarah suggested I consider applying to graduate programs if I wanted to explore my interests further before committing to a career. My parents spoke enthusiastically about the opportunities available to computer science graduates, listing companies where I could apply for programming positions. No one asked about my channel, which had grown to over 100,000 subscribers by then. No one inquired about the brand partnerships I had developed or the business relationships I was cultivating. The work that consumed most of my time and generated increasing income remained invisible to them, categorized as a hobby that would naturally fade once I embarked on serious professional pursuits. I had tried, briefly, to explain the scope of what I was building. Actually, I had said during that graduation dinner, I'm planning to focus on content creation full-time. My channel is doing really well, and I have some exciting opportunities lined up. The table had gone quiet for a moment, not with respect or curiosity, but with the kind of concerned silence that follows when someone announces a decision that seems obviously mistaken. My father had cleared his throat and suggested we discuss it more privately later. My mother had reached over to squeeze my hand, her expression mixing love with worry in equal measure. "Sweetheart," she had said gently, "it's wonderful that your videos are popular, but you need something stable to fall back on. You can keep making them as a hobby while you establish yourself professionally." Fall back on, as if my education were a safety net for when my real ambitions inevitably failed, rather than a foundation that supported everything I was already building. The conversation had moved on to safer topics, leaving me to wonder how much success would be required before they recognized it as legitimate. That night, I had gone home to my apartment and uploaded a video that would become one of my most popular, a detailed tutorial on creating dramatic eye looks for special occasions. Within 24 hours, it had gained over 200,000 views and attracted attention from several major cosmetics brands. Comments poured in from viewers thanking me for helping them feel confident, for teaching them techniques they couldn't afford to learn elsewhere, for creating content that made them feel seen and valued. But my family never saw those comments, never witnessed the community I was building, never understood that success sometimes looks different than they imagined. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in September, exactly 3 weeks after my graduation dinner. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by ring lights and camera equipment that had slowly colonized every available surface, when my mother called with what she clearly considered exciting news. "Maya, honey, I have wonderful news." Her voice bubbled through the phone with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for genuine breakthroughs. "Your father spoke with his client Jonathan Reed yesterday. You remember Jonathan? He runs that tech consulting firm downtown, and he mentioned they're looking for junior developers. Your father told him all about your computer science degree and your technical skills, and Jonathan said he'd love to meet with you this Friday." I stared at the camera mounted on my desk, the same camera that had recorded content viewed by millions of people, generated thousands of dollars in revenue, and built connections with industry professionals whose names would mean nothing to my parents because they didn't work in traditional office buildings. "That's nice of him to think of me," I managed, trying to inject appropriate gratitude into my voice while my chest tightened with familiar frustration. "Nice?" My mother's tone shifted to gentle correction. "Maya, this is exactly the kind of opportunity you need. Jonathan's company works with major corporations, helps them develop their technology infrastructure. It's stable, well-paying work that uses your education properly. You could start building a real career." Real career. Those two words had become a constant refrain in conversations about my future, always carrying the implicit message that whatever I was currently doing didn't qualify as genuine professional activity. I had wanted to ask my mother what made sitting in a cubicle writing code for someone else's vision more real than building my own brand, developing my own audience, and generating my own income. Instead, I promised to consider the interview and hung up feeling more isolated than ever. That night, I couldn't concentrate on editing the skincare routine video I'd filmed earlier. Every time I tried to focus on color correction or audio levels, my mother's words echoed in my mind, mixing with years of similar conversations until they became a chorus of doubt that made my hands shake over the keyboard. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was deluding myself about the sustainability of content creation. Maybe I should accept that what I'd built was impressive for a hobby, but insufficient as a foundation for adult life. I opened my laptop and navigated to the job posting my mother had mentioned. The description was exactly what she'd promised. Stable, respectable, clearly defined advancement opportunities within an established company structure. The salary was decent, the benefits comprehensive, the work environment professional. Everything a parent could want for their daughter's entry into the workforce. But as I read through the requirements and responsibilities, something cold settled in my stomach. 8 hours a day in an office building, writing code to implement other people's ideas, following protocols designed by committee, measuring success through performance reviews conducted by supervisors who would evaluate my value based on billable hours and client satisfaction metrics. I closed the laptop and walked to my bathroom mirror, the same mirror where I'd filmed hundreds of tutorials, where I'd experimented with countless looks, where I'd built the confidence to speak directly to strangers who had become a community. The woman looking back at me had created something extraordinary from nothing but curiosity and determination. She had taught herself complex technical skills, developed business relationships, and built a platform that reached people across continents. That's when it happened. Not a dramatic moment of revelation, but a quiet crystallization of understanding that felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. I didn't need my family's permission to be successful. I didn't need their validation to prove. My work had value. I didn't need to translate my achievements into language they could understand in order for those achievements to be real. Standing in that bathroom, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had become extensions of my creativity. I made a decision that would change everything. I would stop trying to make them see what I was building. Instead, I would focus entirely on building it bigger, stronger, and more undeniably successful than anyone could dismiss or ignore. The decision felt like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. For years, I had been unconsciously holding back, tempering my ambitions and limiting my scope because part of me worried my family might be right about the impracticality of my chosen path. I had been running my channel like a sophisticated hobby rather than the business it actually was, perhaps because treating it as a business would have required me to confront their skepticism directly. But that night, I stopped hedging my bets. I canceled the interview with Jonathan Reed's company, much to my mother's disappointment and my father's visible concern. When they asked for explanations, I simply said I had decided to pursue other opportunities. I didn't elaborate because I was done defending choices they couldn't understand. Instead, I threw myself into my work with the intensity that surprised even me. I started treating my content creation like the professional operation it had always been, but which I had been afraid to fully embrace. I hired a part-time assistant to help with email management and administrative tasks. I invested in professional-grade equipment that transformed my apartment into a legitimate production studio. I developed partnerships with brands that aligned with my values and audience rather than accepting every collaboration offer that came my way. Most importantly, I started planning for scale. Where I had once approached each video as an individual project, I began developing content series that would build on each other, creating comprehensive resources that viewers would return to repeatedly. I researched advanced SEO techniques, studied algorithm patterns, and optimized my upload schedule based on detailed analytics rather than convenience. The change in my approach was subtle but profound. Instead of creating content that might impress my family if they ever bothered to watch it, I focused entirely on serving the audience I had already built and attracting the viewers who would genuinely benefit from what I offered. I stopped second-guessing every creative decision through the filter of traditional professional acceptability and started trusting my instincts about what my community needed. Within a month, the results were undeniable. My subscriber count, which had been growing steadily but slowly, suddenly accelerated. Comments became more engaged, with viewers sharing detailed stories about how my tutorials had helped them prepare for job interviews, first dates, or important family events. Brands began reaching out with more lucrative partnership offers, and several companies asked about long-term ambassador relationships rather than one-off promotional posts. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. I stopped feeling defensive about my work because I was no longer trying to justify it to people who couldn't see its value. I developed a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what I was building and why it mattered, regardless of whether anyone else understood or approved. My family noticed the shift, though they misinterpreted its meaning. At Marcus's birthday dinner in October, my mother commented that I seemed more focused lately, as if I had finally begun taking my future seriously. My father mentioned approvingly that I appeared to be developing more realistic expectations about career development. They assumed my newfound determination meant I was preparing to transition away from content creation toward traditional employment. I let them believe whatever made them comfortable. Their assumptions were no longer my concern, because I was building something they couldn't diminish with their misunderstanding. Every video I uploaded, every collaboration I completed, every milestone I reached was a brick in a foundation they couldn't see, but which was becoming unshakable nonetheless. The decision to work in silence wasn't motivated by secrecy or spite. It was strategic. I had learned that seeking approval from people who couldn't recognize success when it didn't match their expectations was not only futile, but actually counterproductive. Their well-meaning concern was noise that interfered with the clarity I needed to make smart business decisions. So I stopped sharing updates about subscriber milestones or revenue achievements. I stopped mentioning brand partnerships or collaboration opportunities. When family conversations turned to career topics, I deflected with vague responses and changed the subject as quickly as possible. They interpreted my reticence as evidence that I was finally outgrowing my creative phase. I knew it meant I was just getting started. The transformation of my apartment happened gradually, so gradually that I barely noticed when my living space became indistinguishable from a professional production studio. What started as a ring light positioned near my bedroom window evolved into a sophisticated setup that would have impressed the marketing departments at major corporations. Professional-grade cameras mounted on adjustable arms, softbox lighting systems that could simulate any time of day, and acoustic panels disguised as decorative wall art turned my modest one-bedroom into a content creation powerhouse. But the real work happened in the hours when most people were sleeping. While my family assumed I was struggling to find direction, I was actually working 18-hour days with the focused intensity of someone building an empire. My daily routine became a carefully choreographed dance between content creation, business development, and audience engagement that left no room for the uncertainty my family imagined plagued my life. I woke every morning at 5:30, before sunrise painted Vancouver's skyline in shades of possibility. The first hour belonged entirely to analytics and strategy, studying viewer engagement patterns with the meticulous attention my father applied to tax codes. I tracked which videos performed best at different times of day, which thumbnails generated the highest click-through rates, and which topics resonated most strongly with different demographic segments of my audience. My coffee table disappeared under spreadsheets that mapped content calendars 3 months in advance. Each video was planned with military precision. Topic research, product sourcing, filming schedule, editing timeline, and promotional strategy across multiple social media platforms. I developed systems for everything, from inventory management, for beauty products to response templates for the hundreds of comments I received daily. The business side of my operation grew more sophisticated every week. I incorporated myself as a small business, opened separate bank accounts for revenue, streams, and began tracking expenses with accounting software that would have satisfied my father's professional standards. Brand partnership negotiations that once intimidated me became routine conversations where I confidently discussed usage rights, exclusivity clauses, and performance metrics. But perhaps the most significant development was my growing network of industry connections. What had started as occasional emails from small beauty brands evolved into regular communication with marketing directors at companies whose products lined the shelves at major department stores. I was invited to exclusive brand events, product launches, and industry conferences where I networked with other creators who had built similar businesses from bedroom studios like mine. One particularly memorable evening in November, I found myself at a private dinner hosted by Luminous Cosmetics in downtown Vancouver. The guest list included their entire marketing team, several established beauty influencers, and a handful of traditional media beauty editors. As I sat at a table set with crystal stemware and discussed quarterly campaign strategies with executives who managed million-dollar budgets, I couldn't help thinking about the conversation I'd had with my family just hours earlier. During our weekly phone call, my mother had asked if I was still playing around with makeup videos and wondered whether I'd given more thought to pursuing a marketing degree. The disconnect between her perception and my reality felt surreal as I excused myself to take her call from a dinner where I was being courted as a key partner in a campaign that would reach millions of consumers. "I'm doing well, Mom," I had said, stepping onto the restaurant's patio where city lights reflected off English Bay. Still exploring opportunities. The conversation had lasted 10 minutes, covering my health, the weather, and Marcus's latest case victory, while I stood 30 feet away from discussions about six-figure advertising budgets and global product launches. My technical skills expanded exponentially during this period of hidden growth. I taught myself advanced video editing techniques that professional filmmakers used, studied color grading and audio engineering through online courses, and mastered search engine optimization strategies that most digital marketing specialists never learned. My computer science background proved invaluable as I automated many aspects of my business operations, from social media scheduling to email list management. The learning curve was steep but exhilarating. I consumed industry publications, joined private forums where successful creators shared strategies, and attended virtual workshops led by experts who commanded speaking fees my family couldn't imagine. Every skill I acquired multiplied my effectiveness and opened new revenue streams I hadn't previously considered. Collaboration requests began arriving from unexpected sources. Fashion brands wanted styling videos featuring their latest collections. Technology companies sought my perspective on products designed for content creators. Even traditional media outlets started reaching out for quotes about beauty trends and social media marketing strategies. Each opportunity expanded my professional network and elevated my industry credibility. My subscriber count climbed steadily throughout the winter months, crossing milestone after milestone with satisfying regularity. 200,000 became 300,000, then 400,000, with each threshold bringing new opportunities and higher value partnerships. But more importantly than the numbers was the quality of engagement I was achieving with my audience. Comment sections that had once been simple compliments evolved into detailed conversations where viewers shared personal stories, asked complex questions, and built relationships with each other. I wasn't just creating content. I was facilitating a community where strangers supported each other's confidence journeys and celebrated small victories together. The responsibility felt significant and deeply satisfying. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Revenue streams diversified beyond simple sponsored content. I launched my own line of makeup brushes in partnership with a manufacturing company, created digital courses, teaching advanced makeup techniques, and developed affiliate relationships with brands whose products I genuinely recommended. Each income source required different skills and management strategies, transforming me into a multifaceted entrepreneur rather than just a content creator. The physical demands of running a one-person operation pushed me to develop systems that maximized efficiency without sacrificing quality. I batch-filmed content during dedicated shooting days, scheduled social media posts weeks in advance, and outsourced administrative tasks to freelancers who helped manage my growing business operations. My apartment became a carefully orchestrated workspace where every square foot served a specific function. Storage solutions disguised as furniture held inventory for brand partnerships and my own product lines. A dedicated corner served as my shipping station for merchandise orders. Even my kitchen became part of the operation, with specialized lighting for filming product unboxings and flat-lay photography that showcased new releases to their best advantage. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't always afford, but exhaustion felt different when it came from building something meaningful rather than from fighting against circumstances beyond my control. Every late night spent editing videos or responding to business emails was an investment in a future I was actively creating rather than passively hoping for. Brand partnerships began requiring contracts that needed legal review, so I found an entertainment lawyer who specialized in influencer agreements. The first time I sat in her downtown office discussing intellectual property rights and usage terms, I felt like I was inhabiting someone else's life. 6 months earlier, my family had been encouraging me to apply for entry-level positions. Now I was negotiating terms with companies that spent more on single campaigns than most people earned in years. The isolation became both a challenge and a strategic advantage. Working alone meant every decision fell to me, from creative direction to business strategy, but it also meant I could move quickly without consulting committees or seeking approval from supervisors who might not understand my vision. The independence was intoxicating after years of being treated like someone who needed guidance to find her way. My confidence grew with every successful campaign, every positive interaction with industry professionals, every milestone that proved My business model was not only sustainable, but actively thriving. I stopped second-guessing creative instincts that had consistently proved reliable, trusted my judgment about which opportunities aligned with my brand values, and developed the kind of professional presence that commanded respect in meetings with executives twice my age. But the most profound change was internal. I began seeing myself the way my audience and business partners saw me, as someone who had built something impressive through skill, determination, and strategic thinking. The voice in my head that had once echoed my family's concerns about my impractical choices was gradually replaced by quiet confidence in my abilities and clear vision for my future. By spring, when cherry blossoms transformed Vancouver into a city of pink and white dreams, I was operating a business that generated more monthly revenue than Marcus earned at his law firm. But my family still thought I was playing around with makeup videos while figuring out what I really wanted to do with my life. Spring brought a renewed sense of urgency to my family's concern about my future. As Vancouver's cherry blossoms burst into full bloom, so did their anxiety about what they perceived as my continued lack of direction. The conversations that had once been gentle suggestions evolved into more pointed interventions, as if my approaching 25th birthday represented some kind of deadline for getting my life together. The shift became apparent during Marcus's housewarming party in April. He and Sarah had purchased a sleek 2-bedroom condo in Yaletown, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, stainless steel appliances, and a view of False Creek that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. The open house was a celebration of traditional success, filled with young professionals who discussed mortgage rates and property investments with the casual confidence of people who had followed expected paths to predictable outcomes. I arrived carrying a gift bag from Williams-Sonoma, having carefully selected kitchen accessories that would complement their modern aesthetic. But as I handed over the present, I caught my mother and Aunt Linda exchanging one of those meaningful looks that carried entire conversations in a single glance. "Maya's gift is lovely," my mother said to Sarah, her tone suggesting she found my thoughtfulness both touching and somehow concerning. "She has such good taste. It's a shame she can't seem to apply that creativity to building a career." The comment stung not because it was deliberately cruel, but because it revealed how completely my family had constructed a narrative about my life that bore no resemblance to reality. While they saw someone drifting without purpose, I was actually in the middle of negotiations for the largest brand partnership of my career. While they worried about my inability to commit to traditional employment, I was managing multiple revenue streams and planning the expansion of my business operations. Uncle Robert approached me near the kitchen island where appetizers were arranged on slate serving boards. "Maya, your father mentioned you're still doing those video projects. That's nice that you have a hobby, but have you considered what you want to do professionally?" His question carried the patient tone of someone offering guidance to a young person who clearly needed direction. "I'm actually doing quite well with content creation," I said carefully, testing whether any acknowledgement of my success might penetrate their predetermined assumptions about my situation. "That's great that you're enjoying it," he replied, completely missing the implication that my work might be financially viable. "But you're too smart to waste your education on something temporary. Your computer science degree could open so many doors if you just apply it properly." The conversation continued in this circular pattern, with my family members taking turns expressing concern about my lack of traditional career progression, while simultaneously dismissing the career I had already built. Their inability to see what was directly in front of them might have been amusing if it weren't so personally isolating. Later that evening, as guests mingled on Marcus's balcony overlooking the harbor, I overheard my father speaking with Sarah's colleague about my situation. "Maya's our creative one," he was saying, his voice carrying that particular mixture of affection and frustration parents reserve for discussing their most puzzling child. "Very talented with technology, but she's having trouble translating that into sustainable work. We keep hoping she'll find something that uses her skills more productively." more productively. I wanted to show him the analytics dashboard on my phone, where he could see that my latest video had generated over 800,000 views and earned more money in a single week than he typically made in a month. I wanted to explain that my skills were being used so productively that major corporations competed for my attention, and industry publications sought my expertise on emerging marketing trends. Instead, I smiled and nodded when the conversation eventually included me, offering vague responses about exploring opportunities and considering various options. The script had become so familiar that I could participate in these discussions while thinking about entirely different topics, like the brand campaign I was developing or the equipment upgrade I was planning for my studio. The pattern repeated itself at every family gathering throughout the spring and early summer. During my grandmother's 82nd birthday celebration, distant relatives asked about my job search with the kind of concerned sympathy usually reserved for discussing chronic illnesses. At my cousin David's high school graduation party, family friends offered career advice based on their assumption that I was struggling to launch my professional life. Each conversation reinforced their collective conviction that I was a bright, young woman who simply needed the right guidance to find her way. They spoke about me in gentle, encouraging terms, the way you might discuss someone recovering from a setback or working through a difficult transition. Their love was genuine, but their blindness was complete. The most frustrating incident occurred during a family barbecue at my parents' house in June. I had just returned from a 3-day business trip to Toronto, where I had attended a major beauty conference, met with potential partners, and spoken on a panel about the future of digital marketing. The experience had been professionally validating and personally energizing, confirming that I was operating at the highest levels of my industry. But when I arrived at the barbecue, still wearing the professional blazer I'd worn for my panel presentation, my family's first questions focused on why I looked so tired and whether I was taking care of myself properly. My mother worried that I was staying up too late, playing on the computer, while my father suggested I might benefit from establishing more regular sleep habits. "You know, Maya," my mother said while we arranged salad ingredients in her kitchen, "your father and I have been thinking. Maybe it's time to consider going back to school. A master's degree might help you figure out what you really want to do professionally." Going back to school. As if additional education would somehow clarify a career path I had already successfully navigated for 2 years. As if the business I had built, the partnerships I had developed, and the income I was generating were all evidence of confusion rather than achievement. "I appreciate you thinking about my future," I said, choosing my words carefully to avoid either lying or revealing information I wasn't ready to share. "But I'm actually pretty clear about my direction right now." "Are you, though?" she asked with genuine concern. "Because from the outside, it looks like you're still experimenting with different things, instead of committing to building something substantial." Building something substantial. The phrase echoed in my mind as I helped carry dishes to the backyard, where my extended family had gathered around picnic tables my father had set up on the deck. If they could see the business plan I had developed, the quarterly projections I updated monthly, the team of freelancers I was beginning to coordinate, would they recognize it as substantial? Or would the fact that it happened online and involved makeup tutorials automatically disqualify it from serious consideration? During dinner, the conversation turned to Marcus's latest case, a complex corporate merger that would likely earn his firm substantial fees. The family listened with appropriate admiration as he described the legal challenges involved and the strategic thinking required to navigate competing interests. His work was important, respected, easily understood by people who had never practiced law themselves. When attention briefly turned to me, I mentioned that I had been traveling for work, hoping to plant seeds of recognition that my activities might be more professional than they assumed. But my comment was met with polite curiosity rather than genuine interest, as if business travel were an unusual hobby rather than a routine part of entrepreneurial life. "Where did you go, sweetie?" my grandmother asked, probably hoping for details about a vacation or personal trip. "Toronto," I said, "for a conference." "How nice," she replied. "Was it a computer conference? Something related to your degree?" The question revealed how completely they had categorized my work as adjacent to technology rather than as a legitimate business operation. In their minds, any professional activity I might engage in would necessarily relate to my computer science education, because they couldn't imagine that I had developed expertise in an entirely different field. As summer progressed, their concern about my lack of traditional career markers intensified. Comments about my need to get serious about my future became more frequent. Suggestions about graduate school or professional networking events arrived via text message, and family friends were enlisted to offer career guidance based on their own conventional success stories. The weight of their collective worry might have shaken my confidence if I hadn't been simultaneously experiencing unprecedented professional growth. While they planned interventions to help me find direction, brands were competing for my partnership. While they researched graduate programs they thought might interest me, I was consulting with legal and financial advisors about business expansion strategies. The disconnect between their perception and my reality had grown so vast that bridging it seemed impossible. They saw someone who needed saving. I was someone who had already saved herself and was building something remarkable in the process. But explaining this would have required them to fundamentally revise their understanding of what success looked like, and I was no longer sure they were capable of that kind of paradigm shift. So I continued working in silence, building something they couldn't see, preparing for a revelation that would change everything. The cracks in my carefully maintained facade began showing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small inconsistencies that I'd managed to overlook for months suddenly seemed glaring, especially to family members who had spent years cataloging evidence of my supposed lack of direction. The problem wasn't that I was failing to hide my success. It was that success, like water, has a way of finding every crack and seeping through despite your best efforts to contain it. The first sign came during a casual lunch with my mother in July. We were sitting at her favorite cafe in Kitsilano, sharing a table near the window where afternoon light filtered through hanging plants and cast shifting patterns across the reclaimed wood surface. She had ordered her usual quinoa salad while I picked at avocado toast, my attention divided between our conversation and the constant stream of notifications buzzing from my phone. "You're certainly popular today," she observed after the fourth interruption in 10 minutes. Her tone carried that particular mixture of curiosity and concern that mothers perfect when they suspect their children are hiding something significant. I glanced at the screen, where messages from my assistant, 2 brand managers, and a potential collaboration partner were stacking up like digital evidence of the professional life I'd worked so hard to keep invisible. "Just some group chats," I said, flipping the phone face down on the table with perhaps more force than necessary. But my mother had already noticed details I'd been too distracted to manage. The phone case was expensive leather, not the budget. Plastic cover I'd carried through university. My watch was new, a sleek Apple model that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Even my clothes had evolved beyond the thrift store finds and student discounts that had once defined my wardrobe. "That's a lovely blazer," she said, reaching across to feel the fabric between her fingers. "The material is beautiful. Where did you find it?" The blazer had been a calculated purchase for my panel appearance in Toronto, selected specifically to project professional credibility among industry executives who evaluated people based on such subtle signals. It cost more than I'd ever spent on a single piece of clothing, but the investment had paid dividends in how seriously I was taken during business meetings. "I got it for the conference," I said truthfully, hoping she wouldn't ask for specifics about either the price or the event itself. "You seem to be attending a lot of conferences lately," she said, her detective instincts sharpening. "What exactly do these computer conferences involve? Are you networking for job opportunities?" Computer conferences. Her assumption that any Professional event I attended must relate to my degree revealed how completely she'd constructed explanations for my activities that fit her existing narrative. I had attended beauty industry events, digital marketing summits, and influencer business workshops, but none of those categories existed in her understanding of legitimate professional development. Something like that, I replied, which was both true and completely misleading. I was networking, but for partnership opportunities and business expansion rather than traditional employment. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but I caught her studying me with new attention throughout the rest of our lunch. She noticed when I automatically reached for the check, then seemed surprised when I paid with a credit card rather than counting cash like a budget-conscious recent graduate. She commented on my confidence when speaking with the server, as if decisive interactions with service staff were somehow unexpected from someone she considered professionally adrift. These small revelations accumulated like drops of water that would eventually become a flood. At Marcus's birthday dinner in early August, my father observed that I seemed more settled lately, as if some internal anxiety had resolved itself. During a family shopping trip to pick out a gift for my grandmother's upcoming birthday, my mother noticed that I wasn't checking price tags with the careful attention of someone watching every dollar. "You seem more relaxed about money," she mentioned as we browsed through jewelry displays at a department store downtown. "Have you found some part-time work to supplement your projects?" Part-time work to supplement my projects. The phrase revealed how thoroughly she'd categorized my business as something that might generate pocket money, but couldn't possibly support an independent adult lifestyle. The reality was that my projects were generating more monthly income than most full-time professionals earned, but explaining this would have required conversations I wasn't prepared to have. "I'm managing fine," I said, which was simultaneously the understatement of the year and the most honest answer I could give without triggering an interrogation about income sources my family wouldn't understand or believe. But my evasiveness was becoming harder to maintain as the evidence of my professional success multiplied. Packages arrived at my apartment with increasing frequency, deliveries from brands that sent products for review, equipment for my expanding studio setup, and business documents that required signatures and return shipping. My building's concierge knew me by name and had started commenting on the volume of deliveries I received. The problem intensified when I needed to upgrade my apartment to accommodate my growing business operations. The one-bedroom space that had served adequately when I was starting out could no longer contain the equipment, inventory, and workspace requirements of my expanding enterprise. But finding a larger apartment meant explaining to my family why I suddenly needed more space, especially since they assumed I was struggling financially. I solved the problem by signing a lease on a 2-bedroom unit in the same building, telling my parents that I'd found a roommate to help split costs. The explanation satisfied their concern about my financial responsibility, while allowing me to convert the second bedroom into a dedicated studio space with professional lighting, sound equipment, and storage systems that would have impressed any corporate video production department. But lies, even practical ones told for reasonable purposes, have a way of creating complications. When my mother offered to help me move, I had to carefully orchestrate the process to ensure she saw only the items that supported my cover story. Professional camera equipment became a friend's photography gear that I was temporarily storing. Boxes of inventory for brand partnerships were labeled as personal items and moved when she wasn't present. The most challenging moment came when she discovered a stack of business cards on my desk while helping me organize the new apartment. Maya Chen, content creator and digital marketing consultant, they read in elegant typography that conveyed professional credibility. "These are beautiful," she said, examining the card with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "When did you have these made? Are you thinking about freelance marketing work?" Freelance marketing work. Once again, she had constructed an explanation that fit her existing understanding of my situation. In her mind, business cards meant I was finally taking steps toward traditional professional employment, perhaps positioning myself for consulting, Opportunities that would eventually lead to full-time work with an established company. I thought they might be useful for networking, I said, which was technically accurate while completely obscuring the fact that I already had more networking opportunities than I could manage and was turning down business inquiries on a weekly basis. The questions multiplied as my family's observational skills sharpened. Why did I always seem to be traveling on weekdays? Where were these conferences being held, and who was paying for my attendance? How could I afford professional clothing and expensive equipment on the irregular income they assumed I was earning from occasional video projects? Their concern reached a peak during my cousin Rebecca's wedding shower in September. I had just returned from a 5-day business trip to Los Angeles, where I'd attended VidCon, filmed collaboration content with 3 major creators, and met with executives from a streaming platform about a potential partnership deal. The experience had been both exhausting and exhilarating, confirming that I was operating at the highest levels of my industry. But when I arrived at the bridal shower, still carrying the professional energy of someone fresh from high-level business meetings, my family immediately noticed that something had changed. I moved with more confidence, spoke with greater authority, and carried myself like someone accustomed to being taken seriously by important people. "You seem different," my Aunt Susan observed during the gift-opening ceremony. "More professional, I guess? Like you've been practicing for job interviews or something." Job interviews. The assumption that any increase in my professional bearing must be preparation for traditional employment revealed how completely they dismissed the possibility that I might already be succeeding in a non-traditional career. But their increased attention was making my carefully maintained privacy more difficult to sustain. Phone calls that I needed to take for business purposes became suspicious interruptions. Equipment deliveries required explanations that grew more elaborate with each package. Even my schedule was becoming harder to explain, as brand partnerships and content creation deadlines meant I was often unavailable during conventional business hours when unemployed people were supposed to be job hunting. The mounting evidence of my success was creating pressure that would soon become impossible to contain. My family's detective work was uncovering clues that didn't fit their narrative about my situation. But rather than revising their assumptions, they were becoming more determined to solve what they perceived as the mystery of my recent transformation. They had no idea that the mystery they were trying to solve was simply the difference between their perception and my reality, or that the truth was more extraordinary than any explanation they were likely to construct. The call from Nord Stream Gaming came on a Wednesday morning in late June, while I was editing a collaboration video in my apartment studio. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but something about the timing felt significant enough that I paused my work and answered with my standard professional greeting. "Maya Chen speaking." "Ms. Chen, this is Victoria Reynolds from Nord Stream Gaming's marketing division. We've been following your content for several months, and I'd like to discuss a potential partnership opportunity that could be mutually beneficial." Victoria's voice carried the kind of crisp authority that came from managing 8-figure marketing budgets and making decisions that influenced global brand strategies. As she outlined Nord Stream's vision for their upcoming campaign targeting female gamers, I realized this wasn't just another brand partnership inquiry. This was the kind of opportunity that could fundamentally change my business trajectory. "We're looking for a creative partner who can authentically connect with our target demographic," Victoria explained. "Someone who understands both beauty and gaming culture, who can create content that feels genuine rather than purely commercial. Your audience engagement metrics and demographic breakdown suggest you might be exactly what we're looking for." The conversation lasted 45 minutes, covering everything from content creation timelines to exclusivity clauses, performance metrics, to creative control parameters. By the time Victoria concluded with, "I'll send over the preliminary proposal for your review," I was staring out my window at Vancouver's skyline while processing the magnitude of what had just been offered. The email arrived within an hour, marked with the kind of legal disclaimers and confidentiality notices that accompanied truly significant business opportunities. As I scrolled through the proposal document, the numbers seemed almost surreal. A 12-month partnership valued at $1.2 million, with additional performance bonuses that could push the total compensation well beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. But more than the financial implications, the partnership represented validation at the highest levels of the industry. Nord Stream Gaming was a global company whose products were used by millions of consumers worldwide. They didn't partner with hobbyists or amateur content creators. This was an offer extended to someone they considered a serious business professional, capable of delivering results that justified substantial investment. I spent the next 3 weeks in intensive negotiations with their legal team, reviewing contract terms with my entertainment lawyer, and developing creative concepts that would meet their campaign objectives while maintaining my authentic voice. The process was more complex than any business transaction I had previously managed, requiring skills I had developed through years of smaller partnerships, but had never applied at this scale. The final contract arrived for signature on the same morning. My mother called to invite me to Jessica's engagement party. As I signed my name on documents that would transform my financial situation and industry standing, she was leaving a voicemail about family gathering logistics and her hope that I might use the social event as an opportunity to network with successful family friends who could help me find career direction. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would be attending a party where my family planned to offer career advice while carrying a signed contract that proved I had already achieved more professional success than most of them would experience in their entire careers. But I had grown comfortable with such ironies, having learned to navigate the vast disconnect between their perceptions and my reality. I decided to bring the contract with me to the engagement party, not as a prop for dramatic revelation, but as a tangible reminder of what I had built through years of work they had dismissed as frivolous. The document remained in my purse throughout the evening, a quiet source of confidence as I endured another round of well-meaning concern about my future prospects. When conversation at dinner turned to my continued involvement with those makeup videos, I felt different than I had during previous family gatherings. The familiar knot of frustration and defensiveness that usually formed in my chest was replaced by calm certainty about my path and my achievements. I no longer needed their validation because I had earned validation from sources that actually understood my work. "I'm doing quite well with content creation," I said when Uncle Robert asked his predictable questions about my career plans. But this time, my response carried a quiet authority that hadn't been present during previous conversations. Something in my tone must have registered because the table grew slightly quieter, as if family members were recalibrating their assumptions about my level of confidence and professional certainty. I noticed my father studying my face with new attention, perhaps recognizing that his daughter's demeanor had shifted in ways that suggested genuine success rather than stubborn delusion. The moment that changed everything came during dessert, when my phone rang with a call I had been expecting all week. Victoria Reynolds' name appeared on my screen, and I knew this was the confirmation call we had scheduled to finalize the campaign launch timeline. "Excuse me," I said to the table, standing up with my phone. "I need to take this." But as I moved away from the table toward a quieter corner of the restaurant, my mother called out with gentle concern, "Maya, can't it wait? We're having family time." I paused, looking back at faces that were watching me with expressions ranging from mild annoyance to genuine curiosity about who might be calling during family dinner. In that moment, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Actually, this is important," I said, returning to my seat but remaining standing. "I should take this here." I answered the phone with my full professional greeting, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet table. "Maya Chen, creative director speaking. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for calling." The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Every conversation at the table stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses remained suspended in midair. My family stared at me with expressions of complete bewilderment, as if I had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language they didn't recognize. Victoria's voice was loud enough in the restaurant's relative quiet that fragments of our conversation carried to nearby tables. Maya, we're thrilled to move forward with the campaign. The board approved the final budget this afternoon, and we're ready to announce you as our lead creative partner. That's wonderful news, I replied, maintaining eye contact with my family, members who were now listening with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for emergency announcements. I'm excited to begin production on the content series we discussed. The initial payment will process next week, Victoria continued, and we'll schedule the product briefing session for early August. This is going to be our biggest campaign, launch of the year, and having you as our primary creative voice gives us confidence we can reach our target demographic authentically. When I ended the call 3 minutes later, the silence at our table was absolute. My family sat frozen in tableau trying to process what they had just witnessed. Their daughter, whom they had spent years categorizing as professionally directionless, had just conducted a business conversation that sounded nothing like the amateur hobby work they had assumed defined my activities. My mother was the first to speak, her voice careful and uncertain. "Maya, who was that?" "Victoria Reynolds," I said simply. "She's the marketing director at Nordstream Gaming. We've been working on a partnership agreement." "Partnership agreement?" my father repeated, his accountant's mind immediately focusing on the business terminology that suggested contractual obligations and financial transactions. I reached into my purse and withdrew the signed contract, placing it on the table beside my dessert plate. The document was thick, professionally bound, with corporate letterhead that clearly identified it as legitimate business correspondence rather than casual freelance work. "We finalized this last week," I said. "It's a 12-month creative partnership. They're launching a major campaign targeting female gamers, and they wanted me to be their primary content creator and brand ambassador." Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the phone call, leaned forward to examine the contract. As a lawyer, he could quickly identify the key terms and financial provisions that transformed this from casual collaboration into substantial business transaction. "Maya," he said slowly, his voice carrying a note of amazement I had never heard before. "This is a $1.2 million contract." The number hung in the air like a revelation that rewrote everything they thought they knew about my life, my work, and my future. For the first time in years, my family was seeing me exactly as I was. Not someone who needed their guidance to find success, but someone who had already found it and built something extraordinary in the process. The silence that followed Marcus's announcement stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I watched my family's faces transform through a sequence of emotions that would have been comical if they weren't so personally significant. Confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally a dawning recognition that everything they thought they knew about my life had been fundamentally wrong. My father was the first to reach for the contract, his accountant's instincts overriding his shock as he began scanning the legal language with professional intensity. His lips moved slightly as he read, and I could see him processing not just the financial terms, but the sophisticated business structure that governed the partnership. This wasn't a simple endorsement deal or casual collaboration. It was a comprehensive agreement between a major corporation and what they clearly considered a serious business professional. "Maya," he said without looking up from the document, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. "How long have you been operating at this level?" The question revealed how completely he was reassessing not just my current situation, but the entire narrative he had constructed about my post-graduation activities. If I was capable of negotiating million-dollar contracts with global companies, what else had he misunderstood about my professional development? "About 2 years, I said simply, watching him absorb the implications. 2 years during which they had been encouraging me to apply for entry-level positions while I was actually building partnerships with industry leaders. 2 years of family dinners where they had discussed my need for career guidance while I was consulting with lawyers, managing revenue streams, and developing business strategies that would have impressed his most successful clients. My mother's reaction was more emotional than analytical. Her hand went to her throat in a gesture I recognized from childhood moments of genuine surprise, and her eyes filled with tears that seemed to contain equal parts pride and confusion. "But sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about your future, and all this time you were—" She gestured helplessly at the contract, unable to complete the sentence because she didn't have words for what I had been doing. The question struck at the heart of years of careful silence, forcing me to articulate motivations I had never fully examined. Why had I chosen secrecy over transparency? Why had I allowed them to worry unnecessarily instead of sharing my success? "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said, the honesty feeling both liberating and cruel. "Every time I tried to explain what I was building, you translated it into something that fit your understanding of legitimate work. You heard hobby when I said business. You heard temporary when I said sustainable. I stopped trying to convince you because your approval wasn't necessary for my success." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of discomfort around the table. Other diners were beginning to notice our family drama, and Jessica looked mortified that her engagement party had become the backdrop for what appeared to be a significant emotional revelation. Uncle Robert, who had spent years offering unsolicited career advice, now sat speechless as he processed the magnitude of his misunderstanding. The young woman he had seen as professionally directionless had actually been more successful than most people at the table, including himself. "I don't understand," he said finally. "You always seemed so uncertain about your path. We thought you were struggling to find your direction." "I was never uncertain," I replied. "I was just building something you couldn't see. You assumed that because my work happened online and involved makeup tutorials, it couldn't be serious or profitable. But digital content creation is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and I've been operating as a business professional within that space for years." Cousin David, who had once dismissed YouTube careers as sad delusions, now stared at me with the kind of awed respect usually reserved for celebrities. The same person he had mocked for thinking she could become internet famous had just revealed that she was more financially successful than any of the adults at the table. Marcus continued examining the contract with lawyer's precision, occasionally making small sounds of professional appreciation as he discovered particularly sophisticated clauses. "Maya, this is incredibly well negotiated," he said, looking up at me with new respect. "The intellectual property provisions alone suggest you have excellent legal representation. Who's your attorney?" "Jennifer Walsh at Morrison Entertainment Law," I said, naming a firm that specialized in high-level media contracts. "She's been representing me for about 8 months now, ever since my partnerships started requiring more complex agreements." The revelation that I had been working with entertainment lawyers for months added another layer to their reassessment of my professional status. Entertainment lawyers didn't take on hobbyists or amateur content creators. They represented clients who generated substantial revenue and needed sophisticated legal protection for their business interests. Sarah, who had always been kind, but had clearly categorized me as the family member who needed gentle encouragement, now looked at me with something approaching awe. "Maya, I had no idea. The way you've talked about your work, it always sounded so casual." "That was intentional," I admitted. "I learned early that explaining my success was more complicated than hiding it. When I said I was making money from YouTube videos, you heard spare change from a hobby. When I mentioned brand partnerships, you heard amateur endorsements. The easier path was to let you make assumptions while I focused on building my business." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a notification from my assistant about tomorrow's shooting schedule. The mundane business communication served as a reminder that while this conversation was emotionally significant for my family, it was just one evening in the middle of ongoing professional commitments that wouldn't pause for personal revelations. Takioi. Realization seemed to hit my parents simultaneously that they had been treating their daughter like an unemployed recent graduate while she was actually operating a successful business with employees, legal representation, and corporate partnerships. The embarrassment was visible on their faces, mixed with pride they were still processing. "Maya," my father said, setting down the contract and looking directly at me for the first time since I had answered Victoria's call. "I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions about your work based on our own limited understanding, and we completely failed to see what you were actually accomplishing." The apology was generous and sincere, but it also highlighted the vast gap between their perceptions and my reality. They hadn't failed to see my accomplishments because they weren't paying attention. They had failed to see them because success in my field looked nothing like success in theirs. "I understand why you made those assumptions," I said. "Digital content creation doesn't fit traditional career models. There's no clear progression from entry-level to executive positions, no corporate hierarchy to climb, no familiar metrics for measuring success. But that doesn't make it less real or less valuable." The conversation continued for another hour, with family members asking questions that revealed how little they had understood about modern media, digital marketing, and the business models that had become standard in my industry. They wanted to know about subscriber counts, revenue streams, audience demographics, and brand partnership strategies with the curiosity of people discovering an entirely new world. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they looked at me. The gentle concern and barely concealed worry that had characterized their expressions for years was replaced by genuine respect and interest. They stopped offering career advice and started asking for business insights, as if recognizing that I might actually have valuable knowledge to share rather than guidance to receive. When the evening finally ended and we prepared to leave the restaurant, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. Her eyes were still slightly watery, but her expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching admiration. "I'm proud of you, Maya," she said, squeezing my hand. "Not just for your success, but for having the strength to pursue it even when we couldn't see what you were building. That must have been very lonely." It had been lonely, lonelier than I had allowed myself to acknowledge during the years of building in silence. But it had also been necessary and ultimately liberating. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own assessment of progress and potential, and to build something meaningful without requiring external validation at every step. The revelation would change our family dynamics forever, but it would take time for everyone to adjust to seeing me as I actually was, rather than as they had imagined me to be. 6 months after that dinner at Jessica's engagement party, I was sitting in my new office space overlooking English Bay, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the water, while reviewing quarterly revenue reports that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The Nord Stream gaming partnership had launched to remarkable success, generating engagement metrics that surpassed their initial goals and leading to discussions about expanding our collaboration into additional product lines and markets. But the numbers, impressive as they were, represented only the most visible aspect of how dramatically my life had changed since that evening when I finally allowed my family to see what I had been building in silence. The financial success was gratifying, but the personal transformation ran deeper than any spreadsheet could capture. My relationship with my family had evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated when I made the decision to reveal my professional achievements. The initial shock and apologetic recognition had gradually given way to genuine curiosity about my work and respect for the expertise I had developed. My parents, who had once worried about my lack of traditional career progression, now sought my advice about digital marketing strategies for my father's accounting practice and asked thoughtful questions about social media trends that might affect their own professional activities. Marcus had become one of my most enthusiastic supporters, referring clients to me when they needed digital marketing consultation and occasionally seeking my input on cases involving intellectual property disputes in the online content space. The brother who had once patted my shoulder sympathetically while suggesting I consider law school now introduced me at professional events as his sister, the successful entrepreneur, with unmistakable pride in his voice. The transformation extended beyond family dynamics to encompass my entire approach to professional relationships and personal boundaries. The years of operating in secrecy had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between seeking approval and earning respect, between explaining myself to skeptics and focusing my energy on supporters who understood my vision. I had learned that success doesn't require universal recognition to be legitimate, that building something meaningful often involves working through periods when others can't see what you're creating, and that the most important validation comes from results, rather than external acknowledgement. These insights had made me more confident in business negotiations, more selective about partnership opportunities, and more strategic about how I invested my time and attention. The Nord Stream gaming campaign had opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Other major brands began approaching me not just for product endorsements, but for comprehensive marketing strategy development, recognizing that my audience insights and content creation skills translated into valuable business intelligence. I found myself consulting with companies about how to authentically engage with demographics they had struggled to reach through traditional advertising methods. My team had expanded beyond the single assistant I had hired during the early growth phase. I now employed a video editor, a social media coordinator, a business manager, and several freelance specialists who helped with everything from graphic design to legal research. Managing this small but efficient team required skills I hadn't expected to develop when I first started filming makeup tutorials in my bathroom mirror. But the challenges were exciting rather than overwhelming. The office space itself represented a physical manifestation of how far I had traveled from those early days of hiding my work from family members who couldn't understand its value. The converted warehouse in Gastown featured professional-grade filming studios, editing suites, and meeting rooms where I hosted brand partners and collaborated with other creators. The space was designed to be both functional and inspiring, with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and carefully curated art that reflected the creative energy I wanted to maintain as my business continued growing. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how I thought about my role within the broader digital content ecosystem. What had started as personal expression through makeup tutorials had evolved into something approaching social responsibility. My platform reached hundreds of thousands of young women who looked to me not just for beauty advice, but for guidance about confidence, self-expression, and pursuing unconventional career paths. The comments section of my videos had become a community where strangers supported each other through personal challenges, celebrated small victories, and shared resources. About everything from mental health to financial literacy, I received messages from viewers who had started their own businesses after being inspired by my journey, from young women who had found the courage to pursue creative careers despite family skepticism, and from parents who had learned to recognize and support their children's non-traditional ambitions. This broader impact had begun influencing my content strategy and business decisions in ways that extended beyond pure profit considerations. I started partnering with brands that aligned with my values about empowerment and authenticity, even when more lucrative opportunities were available from companies whose missions I couldn't fully support. I developed educational content series about entrepreneurship, financial planning, and building confidence that complemented my core beauty tutorials. The responsibility of influence had also made me more thoughtful about transparency and authenticity in my professional presentations. While I had learned valuable lessons about protecting my work from premature judgment, I had also recognized the importance of sharing the realities of entrepreneurship with young people who might be inspired to follow similar paths. I started speaking at business conferences and university events, not just about digital marketing strategies, but about the emotional challenges of building something unconventional while managing family expectations and social pressure. These presentations allowed me to address the isolation that many young entrepreneurs experience when their chosen paths don't match traditional definitions of success. The speaking engagements also connected me with other professionals who had navigated similar journeys, creating a network of peers who understood both the opportunities and challenges of building businesses in emerging industries. These relationships provided the kind of professional community I had missed during my years of working in isolation, offering both practical advice and emotional support from people who shared similar experiences. My relationship with money had evolved significantly as my income grew beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. The financial security was deeply satisfying after years of careful budgeting and strategic investment in equipment and education, but it also came with new responsibilities and decisions about how to use resources effectively. I had started investing in other creators' projects, providing both financial support and business mentorship to women building their own platforms in the beauty and lifestyle space. These investments weren't just financially motivated. They represented my commitment to expanding opportunities for other people who might face similar family skepticism or industry barriers. I also established a scholarship fund at my university's computer science department, specifically designed to support female students who were interested in combining technology skills with creative pursuits. The scholarship program addressed the gap I had experienced between traditional technical education and the practical skills needed for digital entrepreneurship. Looking back on that evening at Jessica's engagement party, I could see how the moment had served as a catalyst for conversations and changes that needed to happen, but which I had been avoiding through years of careful privacy. The revelation had been uncomfortable for everyone involved, but it had also cleared the air of assumptions and misunderstandings that had been constraining our relationships. My family's initial inability to recognize my success hadn't been malicious. It had been a failure of imagination about what professional achievement could look like in a rapidly changing economy. Their skepticism had reflected generational differences in understanding work, technology, and the possibilities available to young people willing to build something new rather than follow established paths. But their ultimate willingness to revise their assumptions and celebrate my achievements had demonstrated something important about the possibility of bridging generational and cultural gaps through honest communication and mutual respect. The journey from dismissal to recognition hadn't been easy for any of us, but it had ultimately strengthened our relationships by replacing polite concern with genuine understanding. Now, as I sat in my office planning the next phase of my business, expansion, I understood that the most valuable lesson from my experience wasn't about building financial success or gaining family approval. It was about trusting your own vision even when others can't see it, maintaining focus on your goals despite external skepticism, and recognizing that the most meaningful validation comes from the impact you create rather than the recognition you receive. The young woman who had once hidden her ambitions had become someone who could confidently chart her own course while helping others find theirs. That transformation was worth more than any contract, more significant than any revenue milestone, and more lasting than any external recognition. It was the foundation for everything else I would build in the years ahead. Last week, I received an unexpected package at my office. Inside was a handwritten note from my niece Allie, now 12 years old, along with a USB drive containing her first YouTube video. The note read, "Aunt Maya, I made this tutorial about digital art because I want to teach people how to create beautiful things on computers. Mom says I should ask you for advice about building a channel. Can you help me not give up when people don't understand?" I watched her video 3 times, remembering my own first upload and the trembling hands that had held my cheap camera years ago. Her confidence was remarkable, her teaching style natural, and her passion unmistakable. But more importantly, she had learned something I wished I had known at her age: that asking for help from someone who believes in your vision is different from seeking approval from those who don't understand it. I called her that afternoon, and we spent 2 hours discussing content strategy, audience building, and the importance of staying true to your creative voice. When she asked if her parents would ever take her seriously, I smiled and said, "Allie, success has a way of speaking, louder than skepticism. Just keep building something beautiful, and let your work do the talking." 6 months later, Allie's channel had 50,000 subscribers, and my sister was asking me how to help her daughter manage brand partnership inquiries. Sometimes the best legacy isn't what you build for yourself, but what you make possible for the dreamers who come after you. If this story inspired you or reminded you of your own journey, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories every week about people who refuse to let others define their limits, who built extraordinary things from ordinary beginnings, and who proved that the quiet ones often have the loudest impact. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of believers, builders, and dreamers who know that your potential isn't determined by other people's imagination.